Cool. Oscar, good to see you, mate. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Now, I was thinking about this. I mean, here we are. It's 2022. It's good to be in the flesh again. F1 testing, and this is huge for you. This is a monumental year because you're officially a test driver. You have no other commitments in 2022 other than being a part of the Alpine team. How does it feel?
Yeah, it feels very nice to be finally, officially part of an F1 team with BWT Alpine. And yeah, looking forward to it. It's obviously quite a different looking year to previously for me, with not a hell of a lot of driving going on, but nonetheless there's a lot to learn being reserve driver and trying to learn off Fernando and Esteban, so I'm looking forward to it.
And so for the layman, what does being the reserve driver for an F1 team mean?
So the main point of the reserve driver is basically the backup driver. So if Fernando or Esteban are sick or have COVID or can't drive for whatever reason, then I'm the replacement basically. So in a way I'm the third driver, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I guess outside of that role, my other roles is to try and help the team as much as I can, obviously outside of driving. So a lot of time for me will be spent in the simulator back at Enstone, and depending on how the COVID rules play out this year, there's potential to do some race support back at the factory and then fly out to the races, but we'll see how that goes. And yeah, so that's mainly the two areas where I'm needed for reserve driver.
You're on standby like never before.
Pretty much,
It's funny because not until 2020 did we have the concept. I mean, there's always been test and reserve drivers, but it wasn't until the dramas of who's going to drive this weekend.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That it actually kind of has more status now, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think there's always been reserve drivers around, but like you said, until COVID came around, the importance of having them, there immediately on standby hasn't quite been as important. So that's like I said with the COVID rules. If they're a bit more relaxed, then for the European races, I don't necessarily have to be at the circuit. I just have to be in Europe somewhere, so that I can jump on a plane if I'm needed, and then that way I can keep working at the factory and try and help out as much as I can. 2022
cars look pretty different. They look great.
Yes.
If I'm honest as a fan, what do you think of the observations across the grid?
Yeah, I think they look good. The only thing that took a bit of getting used to was the front wings being quite a bit higher. I think the Aston was probably the first car I saw that also has the highest front wing, I think. So that looked a little bit strange, but now I'm getting used to it, and yeah, the cars look great. Obviously very different to years previous, still very big, but no, they look good, I think.
What are your observations of just a day and a bit of testing in terms of, is it obviously it's ridiculous to try and assume anything from a couple of days of testing, but does it feel like this is going to be one of those years where we don't really know what's going to happen?
I think so, yeah. Obviously, I was quite surprised. I think everybody was quite surprised that the reliability of the cars yesterday seemed to be very strong. Like we didn't have any red flags for the whole session. I think only Alfa Romeo and Haas had a few issues, so didn't do too many laps. But a lot of the other teams got well into the 100 lap mark. So for a normal test day, or what I'm used to anyway, that is a lot of laps. So yeah, it was interesting to see. Obviously, compared to juniors, all the testing that I've done in junior categories, it's much different. You get a lot more sets of tyres, firstly, so you can actually do a lot more running. And then obviously, the teams build all their own parts. It's not sort of these are the parts and try and make the setup quite good straight away. It's firstly make sure the car's running well and nothing's falling off or overheating. And then it's getting down to business on identifying what's working well, what's not working well, and where they can improve.
And again, for the layman, that's a massive thing, isn't it, for the jump up that you've made? F2 champion, congratulations. That's a category where the cars are the same, and the onus is on the teams to set up and refine. Plus, it's all on the driver, right, on the day. Whereas you're coming into a level of sport where everything is unique across every team. Do you notice that? Like, you've spent a bit of time in the garages over the years, but it's a phenomenal difference. This is literally an elite level of motorsport.
Yeah, it is a massive difference, and I think for me personally, that's where in some of the races that I've seen in the past couple of years, being in the garage, like Qatar last year, that was a massive mindset difference for me, because obviously in the junior categories, you've got, like you said, all the cars are the same, and all you can do is work with the team to change the setup. And even on the setup, there's there's only a certain amount of things you're allowed to change, and then the rest is on the driver. Whereas in F1, obviously, you can make whatever part you want within the rules. So there's much more, I guess, pressure and development on that side of things. Of course, the driving is still just as important, but I think when you're in F1, you're expected to know how to drive fast. So that's a massive aspect that I'm really looking forward to trying to understand and learn from this year, because identifying, especially someone like Fernando with so much experience, even Esteban, he's also getting more experience now. Seeing some of the ideas they're coming up with, that's something I've never even had to think about in my junior racing. So it's really eye-opening.
And so are you witnessing Fernando, because I think that would be, frankly, across the grid, it would be the most phenomenal to watch Fernando get out of the car and deliver that feedback. Because that's the critical thing for an engineer, right, is to hear from you, the driver, about how this thing's performing.
Exactly. I think the cars have got a lot of sensors on them, especially in testing. But I think a very good saying that I've had from previous engineers is the driver is still the best sensor and can feel the most things. And obviously he's the one driving the car at the end of the day, and he needs to be comfortable, or she needs to be comfortable driving the car. So seeing somebody like Fernando who has so much capacity, and that's the biggest thing I've noticed from especially Fernando, is his capacity to think about things outside of driving is unbelievable. And the ideas that he's coming up with are very outside of the box, and for me that's been really inspiring to sort of look at and try and meddle that into my own mentality.
It's a great person to have in the team at this stage of your career. What do you expect this year in terms of track time? Do you expect to get much time behind the wheel?
In the 2022 cars, probably not so much. Obviously, there's now the two FP1s for young drivers. So being reserve driver, I'd like to think I'm first in line for those. But we're also putting together an extensive testing program in last year's car.
Okay.
So I actually did a test day in Paul Ricard not that long ago, just a few days ago actually.
Given the rules have changed so much, what does that do? How does that help?
Well, I mean, for me personally, because I'm not racing in anything else this year, those test days in the previous car are almost the only driving I'll do for the whole year. So for me, that's another real chance for me to further try and prove myself to the team, and also keep developing myself, because any day in an F1 car is firstly always awesome, and secondly always you always learn a lot. So I think there's a lot of F1 specific things that you can only kind of learn and experience from actually driving an F1 car. So those test days for me are really important, regardless of obviously the rule set for that year for last year was very different. But there's still a lot of things that are carried over for this year. Because
an F2 car to a layman might look like similar to a Formula 1 car, but acceleration, braking, speed through turns, that's ridiculously different, and that's what you need to adjust your body, your reactions. That's why that feeling is important.
Yeah, exactly. The step from F2 to F1 is enormous. Like you said, they look quite similar, but they definitely don't feel very similar. So I think a good way of comparing is the jump from F3 to F2 is maybe 4 or 5 seconds, depending on the track. And certainly for last year's cars, the jump from F2 to F1 was always well and truly over 10 seconds. So it's a really big jump. But also, in F2 we have quite a few buttons on the steering wheel, but in terms of physically changing the car, we can only really use the brake bias. Whereas in F1 car, there's all sorts of tools you've got on the steering wheel. I'm sure people that watch have seen all sorts of things flashing up on the dash, and the drivers using their hands a lot on the wheel. There's none of that in F2, and that takes quite a bit of getting used to. And it's they're really powerful tools to determine the balance of the car too.
Monumental year, as I said at the start. Just reflect for a bit. How do we get here? How did 20-year-old Oscar Piastri become this reserve driver for a Formula 1 team?
Well, a lot of hard work, and quite a lot of sacrifice as well. But yeah, I think just working hard, and I think that's the biggest one, and always trying to learn as much as I can. I think for me, throughout my career, when I first moved to Europe especially, it was a bit of a shock to the system, and both culturally and in terms of the I guess, professionalism at the track, and all the tools available to you in terms of data analysis and stuff like that. That was a massive step up that I got my head twisted in a little bit at the beginning. So I guess learning from obviously the good experiences and also very much the bad experiences is how I've developed myself as much as I can. And obviously the last 3 years have been very successful and across different categories. So I've really had to keep on the ball and keep pushing myself and adapting to these new cars. It's clearly put me in good stead to end up where I am now.
What's the sacrifice from your family like to get you to this point?
It's a massive sacrifice. Obviously being from Australia, it probably makes it a little bit more difficult because unfortunately you can't become an F1 driver by staying in Australia. I left home when I was 14, which my mum.
For anyone else, that sounds like a really sad story. You left home when you were 14. There's some other
Exactly.
backstory we all need to know, but that's your family supported you leaving the country at 14 years old.
Exactly, and of course for my mum that was I think for any mum seeing especially their firstborn child leaving home at
15-year-old, I
14.
can't imagine him not being at home at night.
Exactly, and seeing them leave at 14 and not coming back. I think that first trip I was away for 6 or 7 months. It's not easy, and I think I think this is my 6th year over in Europe now, living in Europe, and I've probably spent 6 months of those 6 years actually in Australia. So. It's a massive sacrifice, and obviously it's not financially cheap either. It's a massive financial contribution from my family as well to support my dream, and I'm lucky enough now to say that it's a goal, not a dream. I'm glad that it's paid off, but it was certainly a massive sacrifice.
So what puzzle pieces need to fall into place now for the next real step, which is seeing your name on the grid as an F1 driver?
I think obviously timing is the biggest one now. I feel like I've achieved everything that I can in junior categories, but this year is another good opportunity to try and keep proving myself with this testing program, be as involved as I can with the team, whether that's at the track, learning as much as I can, or being in the sim and trying to make the car faster for them. Timing is really the final piece, I guess, for this puzzle, and only time will tell how that unfolds.
Because it's all well and good to say Fernando's getting old, but if he loves this year, if he loves this car, he's not going anywhere. And Esteban's proven himself to be a great driver. So this timing thing's a real challenge for Formula One, isn't it? We've had such great kind of sliding door moments with many drivers over the years where you literally require something to happen essentially for you. It's essentially all about out of your control now, isn't it?
Exactly, and I think that's something that I've really had to focus on a lot throughout my career, mainly on track, but also now especially off track, is controlling the things that are in your control. Motorsport is notorious for having a lot of things that are out of your control, and unfortunately that timing is one of them. So for me it's about staying patient and seeing how the rest of the driver market unfolds really, because like I said, I don't have any more junior single-seaters to race in, so I think my results are on the board now and they can't be taken away, and now it's about seeing how the pieces unfold, looking forward to next year.
Have you had much FaceTime with the new boss?
With which new boss? So my first meeting with Otmar actually was in a pizza shop in Oxford, so it was just by coincidence, and yes.
Coincidence because you both happen to be getting pizza at the same shop, or?
Yes, correct. Because Aston Martin is obviously based at Silverstone, so it turns out we both live in the same area, and walked into the pizza shop at the same time, and said, "I'm Oscar," and at that point he obviously hadn't been announced yet, and attested his I'm not going to say trust, but he kept it very tight-lipped. So yes, first test for Otmar passed, but no, so it was nice to meet him there, and met him again at the launch, and obviously he's not at the circuit at the moment, working trackside, but that's my first meeting with Otmar.
Because it's really, again, a relationship game, isn't it? You've got some good support with Anne and Mark. they've got to play that game behind the scenes. You just got to focus essentially on yourself this year, or do you need to play some of the politics to, meet the right people to make next year happen for you?
I'm not particularly interested in playing with the politics, to be honest. I'm very much a believer in, proving everything on track, and I think I've done a good job of that so far. Obviously, it's always important to have good relationships, firstly with of course all the senior people in the team, but next it's the engineers, because obviously they're trying to make the car faster for you, and also the mechanics who are building the car for you and making sure it doesn't fall apart. Obviously, we wouldn't be going around the track without them, and everybody else that works behind the scenes. Got James here on the marketing side, making sure I'm getting my exposure. There's all sorts of people in the team that are incredibly important, and relationships with all of them are key.
What do you do to keep the sensors alive? Obviously, you mentioned some, using last year's car, and there's some testing, but that's still very limited. Or how do you keep, because sensors reactions, being an F1 driver, that's critical. How do you keep those going in 2022?
It is quite difficult, especially staying, I guess, physically race fit and getting used to the G-forces. It's very, very difficult, especially for your neck. F1 is such a unique sport in that sense that you use a lot of muscles that you wouldn't normally use, such as your neck, which I'm discovering. Training that for me is probably the biggest focus, I suppose.
Am I right in saying if your trainer is now formerly Roman's trainer?
Yes, Kim Keedle. So another fellow Aussie. So I've got a nice little Aussie band together. He was with Grosjean for the last few years. So we're working hard on making sure I'm ready for this year, mainly in case I get the call up at an hour's notice. So I have to be ready now. In terms of keeping my reactions fit and stuff like that, the simulator is so accurate these days that it really is almost like driving a real car, without obviously the fear factor of crashing and doing a lot of damage to both the car and yourself. So that is a really good way of keeping sharp in terms of driving in some sense. But yes, staying physically sharp is quite a challenge without obviously driving physically. So trying to be fit in the gym and diligent in the gym, especially when there's not much racing going on, is very important. You
mentioned letting your results speak for themselves on track. Off track, Autosport Rookie of the Year twice, and I think it's only Lewis and Charles that have done that, and a lot of previous winners of that awards have gone on to be world champion. Is that an expectation that you have within yourself now, or do you not worry about those things? Because it's a massive thing to have hanging around your neck in a good way.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think a lot of those awards I've had off the track are to do with what I've done on the track. So sure. I think it's still all very much related to that. Obviously having these awards is great for me. It's always an honour to receive any kind of accolade, and to have them on my CV is obviously great. But for me, I think the first immediate goal, and it's still cool saying that this is a goal, but to get into F1 full stop is the first goal. And then obviously I think every racing driver dreams of being F1 world champion, and so do I. But I'm also very conscious that there's a lot of other factors that contribute to being successful in F1. Obviously the cars, I think it's both a blessing and a curse that they're so different and so unique, that you've got so many different solutions that sometimes end up at the same speed. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't. And being in the right place at the right time is a very key part of that. So for me, the first goal is getting to F1, and then doing as best as I can once I get there.
Did you ever challenge yourself or worry that you were actually getting too old? I mean, there's a lot of talk about Max being so young. You're only 20. Age is definitely on your side. I think Lewis was 22 when he started. So age is definitely on your side. What's your goal? 10 years. Push forward 10 years where you're 30 years old. What have you achieved in F1?
That is a very good question. I think, like I said, the first goal is obviously to get on the grid firstly. I hope by that point that I can prove what I can do on track and prove to be a valuable asset and get myself into a championship winning spot. And in 10 years' time, I would like to be very successful in F1. Obviously, being world champion would be amazing. not sure I would say it's a goal just yet, but
Okay.
it's certainly, I'm certainly not going to say no to being world champion. So, yeah, we'll see how it unfolds. But yeah, I think taking it a step at a time, I know it's quite cliche, but that is quite literally how you have to look at it and focus on one step at a time and take the right opportunities when they arise.
Because I think that the World Championship, everyone talks about it. I've asked Daniel about it. It feels like the only thing, but I also see the absolute joy that comes from podiums, let alone race wins. So is it true to say that if you look back in 10 years, so if in 10 years you've got a good handful or a couple of handfuls of race wins and many more podiums, is that a successful career? Because I feel like the World Championship shouldn't be the defining measure of a Formula One career.
No, I agree. I think obviously, when you look back in history, of course, the world champions are the first ones that get recognised. But
people also remember people who haven't finished with podiums as well.
That is true. That is very
Hulk
true.
is probably the most obvious example. People would always talk about that,
Yes.
And I think that's why those numbers are just as important. So, I guess, is there and again, you talk about goals, but how long's too long before you get a race win in Formula One? Let's assume you get into Formula One super quick.
Yep.
How long's too long?
I really don't know, and I think it's so circumstantial that it's impossible to put a number on those kind of things. Obviously, there's if you're in a top team, and it's no different to being in junior formulas. In F2, for example, I was disappointed if we'd finished fourth, but of course, if you're in a team where you're finishing 10th most of the time, finishing fourth is an amazing result, and that's no different in F1. I was in Qatar when Fernando got his comeback podium last year, and seeing the scenes within the team was incredible, and so it's very circumstantial, and of course depends on where you are normally in the pecking order. So yeah, like you said, it's definitely not just defined by World Championships, and I think if you can I guess outperform the car that you're in, that's I think George Russell has been a very fine example of that in years previous. Constantly getting the most out of that Williams, and of course Spa, bit controversial, but he got a podium at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And and even without that, he qualified second. He out-qualified everyone except Max in a Williams, which is an unbelievable result. So it's very circumstantial, and those standout performances can really make a successful career as well.
Sliding doors and moments in time. Jack Doohan's joined the Alpine Junior Academy. You've obviously left the academy and come into the team. Have you had a vision of an all Aussie driver lineup? I mean, my goodness, have you even given that some thought?
No, not particularly, but it would be very cool. I agree. I think it's great to see Australian motorsport in such good hands in Europe at the moment. Obviously, I think a few years ago we had really quite a lot of Aussies. I think we had 7 or 8 of us across various categories, and obviously now it's very difficult from Australia still, and of course those numbers ebb and flow a bit. But obviously having Daniel in F1, myself as reserve driver and knocking on the door, and now Jack in F2. I think I was the first Australian for a long time, if not ever, to be in F2, and now we've had 2 in consecutive years. So. It's very cool for Australia and Australian motorsport, and it would be pretty cool to see 2 or even 3 Aussies on the grid.
You mentioned Daniel. Obviously, he's in the pinnacle. He's up there. He's got a race win even in his most recent team. What have you seen or learnt from him? Is he the kind of guy that you're able to get advice from, even though he's a busy guy with his own world to look at?
I haven't really spoken to him much, to be honest, and. I think it's kind of a bit weird if you just go straight into meeting someone and discussing.
Tell me everything I need to know.
Exactly, and I'm well aware myself now as a racing driver that he talks about racing and all that stuff with all kinds of media 24/7. So I wasn't going to pick his brains about everything in the few times I have spoken to him. But even if you had said 5 years ago, or especially not 10 years ago because he wasn't in F1, but 5 years ago. That I'd even have the chance to speak to Daniel Ricciardo, that I'd be pretty stoked to do that. And now saying that I can speak to him quite a lot and saying that I have his phone number, that's pretty damn cool. So I'm sure if I make it on the grid and spend some more time with him in the same paddock, then we'll speak a bit more. But it's a very busy world in F1, as I'm finding out this week.
Let's talk about Melbourne. Will you be in Melbourne for the Grand Prix? Because you need to be there ready, right?
Yes, I will.
Can't just hop on a flight from Europe in 1 hour.
Exactly, I will be in Melbourne, yes.
And so, that's one of the places, and you don't need to speak to Daniel about this. You're surrounded by people who've worked with Daniel. Mm-hmm. The pressure that Australia puts on Australians in Melbourne is immense. Do you think that's going to be a problem for you even this year?
I don't think
time-wise.
I don't think this year. I think it will be very busy time-wise, but in terms of pressure, obviously, I guess in some ways that's an unintentional positive of this year is I can have all these experiences like going back to Melbourne without the pressure of having to go out and perform, or I'm not expecting.
So you can have a busy schedule and not let it impact on your qualifying session because you don't have one.
Exactly, and of course, to be a successful F1 driver, you have to learn to deal with that pressure. But to have all of these experiences this year without that pressure of going out and driving, or unless it's unexpected. Without that pressure, I think for hopefully when I join the grid, I've seen all of this before. I've experienced it for a year, probably not to quite the same magnitude, but even just visiting some of the countries and getting used to the jet lag, it's the simple things like that that this year I can really capitalise on without the pressure of having to drive and perform week in, week out. So I don't think this year there'll be that much pressure in Melbourne. I think it'll be a pretty crazy experience, but I'm looking forward to it more than anything. And I think in terms of Aussies putting pressure on Australian drivers, we only get one event for the year, and as Aussies we love our sport and get behind our home heroes. So I think it's a great thing rather than sort of a negative pressure. It's eagerness to do well, but I'm sure that's the same everywhere, and having the support of the Aussies is always great. Is
it weird to have just random people tweeting you and having that actual fan base? Does that come as a surprise, or does it grow with you on the journey? It's definitely grown with me on the journey, but yeah, even I've had some very unexpected fan appearances, whether it's been walking through shopping centres in England of all places, or going back to Australia when I was there. It's been pretty cool to have people appreciating what I'm doing and recognising what I'm doing. For now I'm loving it, and it is a bit strange and I'm getting used to it, but no. Who keeps Oscar Piastri grounded? Because I think as an outsider, you see different forms of celebrity, fame, whatever you want to call it, and that's what's coming. You've got a definite level of celebrity and fame just in Australia, let alone the F1 community. But we as Aussies know that whether it's tall poppy or whether it's just someone's full of themselves, sometimes it doesn't come across well. Who's going to keep you grounded through this journey? I think generally I do a pretty good job of that myself. So hopefully Oscar Piastri is going to keep Oscar Piastri grounded. But obviously I've got my friends and family. I've also got Mark and Anne as my management. Obviously Mark's experienced hopefully everything I'm going to go through, everything I want to go through. He'll be keeping a very keen eye. I don't think he will have to keep me in line, but But you're ready for that. Exactly. You're ready for someone to say, mate, don't get so full of yourself. Exactly, and I'm really not expecting that of myself. I'd be quite disappointed in myself if it comes to that point. But I have that support group there for not just that, but for all sorts of other things related to being an F1 driver. And I've got a girlfriend in the UK who is very much in a normal life, if you want to consider F1 unusual. I spend plenty of time with her, and even just doing the simple things of everyday life. What have you been watching on Netflix? What have I been watching on Netflix? The last documentary I watched was something about 9/11, but I'm keen to watch The Tinder Swindler. I haven't watched that yet, but I've heard obviously quite that's your generation, so it doesn't appeal to me at all, but it's your generation. I don't watch that much Netflix actually, so I don't know, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of things to keep me busy and keep me on the ground. All right, Alpine, BWT Alpine is obviously going to be the most successful team of the year because that's what you're going to tell me if I ask you. So who's second, third and fourth behind Alpine in 2022 at your current guesstimate? Just looking at the cars and what you've seen, because there's clear innovation in the teams and hopefully there's going to be some shocks. What do you predict?
I mean, it's very hard to tell, but I think the usual big teams, the usual suspects are going to be somewhere near the front. Obviously in 2009, which was probably the last rule change that was close to this big, obviously Brawn came out of nowhere with their very clever interpretation of the rules and blew the competition away for the first half of the year. So who knows, we could see a similar story, but yeah, if I was to take any guess, I would say the usual teams will probably still be somewhere near the front, but of course it'll be interesting to see how much development everyone else has done in previous years, especially last year. Obviously Mercedes and Red Bull very caught up in the 2021 title battle, and obviously for Red Bull the best chance they've had of winning a title since before the hybrid era. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of impact has impacted them at all. But yeah, I guess we'll find out at the first qualifying session in Bahrain.
Good luck with the circus that is Formula One in 2022, and we look forward to seeing you in Melbourne.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Trevor.